All right, so today I'm with Martin County. I'm the Ecosystem Division Manager. My name is John Maehl. I'm going to focus my conversation today on our local efforts in the watershed and specifically with implications to the watershed by population growth. I want to hit on a couple of factors to start with. The first would be the size of the watershed. And Clay mentioned what has happened with the size of the Indian River Lagoon watershed, and it's similar to our St. Lucie River estuary component of the Indian River Lagoon. This slide here, I know it's difficult to see, but I think it's a fascinating slide. It shows there's kind of a straight line that goes from northwest to southeast, bisecting the St. Lucie County, Martin County line. That's an historic ridge, which kind of defined our original watershed for the St. Lucie estuary. And to the left there's the Alapata Slough and the Cane Slough. And most of that water would just collect there and then slowly sheet flow to the north, into the St. John Marks, and to the east, north of the estuary. Since that time, and that would have been before the city of Stewart was incorporated, we've seen a dramatic change in the watershed. And most of that was in the early 20s in an effort to drain the western basins of Martin County to create more developable land, to create agriculture opportunities. And if you can see in this slide, there's a series of blue lines that are the canals, the C23, the C24, and of course the C44. Now this line I'm going to show you here was not a survey line, in case anybody's wondering. If there's floodplain managers out there, that's not what this line is. This is just representative of what the historic watershed approximately was. And then today it looks more like this. So you can see a dramatic difference in rainfall that hits the surface and ends up in the St. Lucie estuary. So the demand upon the estuary is significantly more than it historically or naturally was intended. One of the consequences of that, of course, is increased pollutants to the estuary. And everything that lands in that area eventually makes its way to it. So what's there becomes a very germane conversation. There's great articles back from the early 20th century about the tarpon fishing in the St. Lucie River and the depth and clarity of that river. And I found that I think it was June 13th of 2023, the C44 discharged the first water from Lake Okeechobee to the estuary. And by 1930, there's records of Martin County's board pleading with the state to stop discharges. So this is not a new problem, and it's a problem that was manifest a long time ago. So what's in the watershed makes a big difference. I found this cute illustration. I have kids, and so kind of everything that I explain is through that lens. And one of the things that, one of the illustrations that is helpful for me, and of course it's probably too obtuse, is when I was a child, I was taught to clean the plate. Any of you had to do that as a kid? Like, I couldn't leave the table until you could put the plate back in the cupboard. It had to be that clean. My kids have a little more refined palate, I'll say, than I was expected to have. And Sam, I'm not going to throw my wife under the bus because she's here, but I will throw my kids under the bus. They will bring their plates back to the kitchen with all manner of debris still on them. And what happens first, right? Dad rinses them in the sink. And the rinsing water that hits that looks different off of a clean plate than it does a plate that has a whole bunch of food left on it. I know that's an oversimplification of the watershed, but the point is, and it works well to illustrate to my children, that whatever's in that watershed where the rain falls, it has the potential to contribute to what ends up into the river, the streams, and on our reefs even. I think we're coming to a place where we're just going to have to reckon with a different paradigm for how we treat rainfall. I mean, we really, Sam talked about it, I think Paul mentioned that we're coming up on an era where we're going to be dealing with water shortage for drinking water in our aquifers. I think that's a trauma to civilization we've yet to wrap our heads around. And it's something probably in my lifetime we're just going to have to address, or it's going to have profound effects. So we have these floating, massive, beautiful desal devices in the sky that we don't regard in that way. We regard them as producing waste. And kind of our mentality, I guess, as we've designed civilization has been more similar to like Trump's deportation policy. We gather up that rain and get rid of it as fast as we can. I don't know anything about politics or immigration, so don't take offense to that. Don't email my boss. But I think we're going to have to get to where we see rain as a resource, and we try to do as much as we can to keep it where it falls. And to me, that's the cheapest solution for dealing with population growth, for dealing with a more urbanized civilization. And I throw this around. I'm not an economist, and so I can say things like this loosely. But I feel like $1 spent on keeping rain where it falls is worth $1,000 downstream of trying to deal with what happens to that rain if we get rid of it quickly. So this map here, I know you can't see it, but you might be able to make out some of the blue dots on it. This demonstrates what Martin County has already done to address watershed efforts. And I'm proud to be a new part of Martin County in their efforts. They've got a great history of addressing watershed management. So each of those blue dots represents a project that was identified to help clean up stormwater in different ways. And I want to talk just generally about that, and then I want to talk about some of the specifics in case some of you out there are as new to this as I am, and you might learn something from the processes that we use. So today, Martin County has invested over $85 million in 39 separate local stormwater projects. That doesn't even address some of the major federal and state projects that are captured in the Indian River Lagoon South component of the SERP plan. Clay touched on that briefly. I plan not to go into much detail on that, assuming that he would more, but we have a massive project that's nearing completion on the C-44, which was part of a cooperative effort with the state water management district as well as the Corps of Engineers. Hundreds of millions of dollars and over 10,000 acres of stormwater treatment area that will handle a significant portion of our local watershed and also mitigate when there has to be discharges through the C-44 from Lake Okeechobee. The county invested $27 million in land acquisition for the C-44 project alone. And the Corps of Engineers partners that we work with have indicated that we would not be anywhere near where we are in progress with that had the citizens of Martin County not stepped up to make that a priority. So now we're very engaged in advocating for other IRL South projects like the C-2324 set of STAs and reservoirs. We're pleased that WRDA passed the Senate a couple of days ago, and we expect that the White House is going to sign that bill, which authorizes continuing progress on the IRL South. There's a schedule that you're all probably familiar with called the Integrated Delivery Schedule that outlines the plan for implementing those major federal and state projects to clean up the watershed. There's concern about some of the things that have been pushed back on that. Really, I began to understand what the IDS really is. It's a planning document. It's based on some formulas that really are never employed at that particular rate. For instance, this year I think we're looking at about $60 million in federal money and $100 million in state money that would go towards IDS projects. The plan was built on a $200 million federal annual budget, and so we're very concerned about the rate of those project completions, and that's an area where Martin County has been very aggressively advocating with our federal and state partners to make sure that funding maintains its priority status. These projects that you see here treat over 15,000 acres of watershed just in eastern Martin County. So I want to talk about some examples of what those projects are. You've probably heard the reference STA, which stands for Stormwater Treatment Area. This is a picture of our stormwater treatment area by Tropical Farms, which has been a huge success. A stormwater treatment area is simply a lake or a pond that's artificially built to slow down stormwater runoff and allow for things to settle out, and it allows for vegetative contact time. And vegetation is specifically chosen that helps to reduce nutrients from that water. They're extremely effective at phosphorus reduction. As Sam talked about at their wastewater treatment plant, the processes they use for their reused water to reduce 80% phosphorus. We get very similar results from a stormwater treatment area without any chemical addition. And they also, by the way, become very popular public recreation facilities. They're beautiful, they're serene, it's peaceful to get out and walk around in them, and it's an all-natural process. They're efficient, they're effective, and also this is another side benefit, but not a small one. They help with local flooding issues. We just completed a project in the last winter at St. Lucie Shores, which is on Map Road south of Martin Highway. That drains an area, or treats an area, that historically flooded with, if they had a couple inches of rain, yards would be flooded, they're all on septic systems. And so the potential for nutrient pollution to the water there was very high. And of course, the impact to the homeowners with flooding was a significant concern. We finished that in the winter. In May, if you remember, we had a little bit of rain. That area had 26 inches of rain and their yards and septic systems were dry. And we know it's because of the increased stormwater infrastructure and the capacity that we've built into the reservoir there to treat that water. Another exciting technology that we have recently started using, we have a couple of them in Martin County. I think this is probably very germane to a discussion that Paul's brought to us today about compact development and how do we plan for increased population. These are called HWTTs in the acronym world, but it stands for Hybrid Wetland Treatment Technology. And what it does is it takes the best of chemical processes and the best of natural processes, and it puts them together in a stormwater treatment facility that is extremely efficient, uses very little land compared to a traditional stormwater treatment area, and costs taxpayers very little money compared to an all-chemical process. Very, very good at taking out phosphorus, and not too bad at taking out nitrogen as well. Here's a diagram you probably can't see that illustrates a typical design for an HWTT. They can come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes and configurations, but typically what you have as the water comes into an HWTT, there's some kind of attenuation that slows the water down, allows it to kind of chill out for a second, and then it mixes with a coagulant chemical, oftentimes that's alum in our case, and then it goes into a period where it's allowed to coagulate and then settle out that coagulant with the pollutants that it attaches to. From there it goes into a floating vegetation mat scenario where this is where it really gets cool. The stuff that doesn't settle out in the coagulant form will then bind with the roots of that floating vegetative mat, and it continues to it makes that floating vegetative mat even more efficient at removing phosphorus from that water. And then finally it goes through a polishing zone, which is sometimes it can be aggregate, sometimes it can be submerged vegetation, and it takes out a little bit more nitrogen at that point and puts out a product that's usually 80% phosphorus reduction and sometimes 30 or 40% nitrogen, along with a lot of other things and almost all the sediment. The illustration on the bottom of this page is a picture of our Bessie Creek hybrid wetland treatment technology. It's an area you can go, and again, they tend to be fairly serene aesthetic features on the landscape. They don't make any noise, they don't take up as much land, and they're extremely effective. A couple other things that we've done in treating our watershed. It's pretty cool when you can show pictures of Jetson planes and rockets taking off into space. I guess we're in the dirt a lot. So. Growth management covers lots of different areas. On the right, what you see there is an exfiltration trench. And what that is just a 2 to 10 foot deep hole in the ground that we fill with clean aggregate. And what that does is allows water to slow down. It captures that water and all the porosity of that rock, and it picks up nutrients. And the longer that's in there, the better filter that becomes. And then at some point, it's going to require maintenance. But it's very effective in a very small footprint to retrofit an area to treat stormwater. On the left, is an example of a baffle box. And what that is just kind of a very small concrete STA that just allows the water to stop for a second, drop out some of its worst pollutants, some of the oils and other things that collect in our surface water before it goes on down the stream. We still have some work to do in Martin County. I haven't heard this reference used yet, so I'll introduce it. There's a plan called a Basin Management Action Plan that's intended to be a cooperative effort to help communities reduce the nutrient pollution into their waters to meet what's called a total maximum daily load. So we've been making great progress on that. Our goal for nitrogen, we've met at 130% already, and we still have several more years in our BMAP. Our phosphorus goal, we're at about 30 to 40%. And we're having to identify more and more projects to keep that going. But at this point, we have another 17 projects identified that will cost about $26 million. And earlier I mentioned that we've spent $85 million in Martin County on that effort. About half of those dollars came from federal and state grant sources. So the dollars that we gather locally, that we put in with our own skin, are being leveraged to maximize potential for water treatment. We look forward to continuing to address these issues. I think there's a good plan. It's constantly having to change as land use changes and land becomes available or unavailable. But this is kind of a map showing what we have left to do. And then I wanted to end with a conversation about our conservation lands. One of Paul's maps that we walked into showed a predictive model map of 2070. I called it the apocalyptic map. What was interesting though for Martin County is on his first map, the current condition showed these green areas that were in conservation lands. That area did not change in the apocalyptic map because the assumption is that when jurisdictions hold land or acquire it for conservation purposes, it stays that way. And so when you looked at Martin County's contribution to conservation land, which is when you put all the jurisdictions together, federal, state, NGOs, we have 115,000 acres, which is 25% of the entire county protected in conservation lands. That will never change colors on that map, no matter how apocalyptic the formula is. So that's a huge hats off to the Martin County residents and the legacy here for protecting land. And the reason why land is so important, it does so many different things. First of all, when it's in conservation, it's not in development. So that can't turn into a red zone on that map. It also provides critical habitat for all of flora and fauna that need it. It provides a natural watershed cleansing process. All of this water and all this land in western Martin County has this historic value for watershed cleaning. It naturally sheet flows and goes through this treatment process that was prescribed in its natural process and is wonderful at doing it. It provides remnants of the historic landscape for the real Florida, so that as Florida becomes more populated, you still have these areas where you can return and see this is what it looked like when we first got here. So there's a lot of value in that. It also provides for human health and quality of life for the population. This is an issue that's near and dear to me. I spent 20 years working in state parks where we provided this venue for letting people get outdoors and the human health aspects to that, the mental health aspects to getting into an open space and experiencing nature. There's so many studies that demonstrate the critical nature of that. And when I think about the population growth models for Florida and the ideas of compact development, the germane nature of having lands like this for people to get out and experience, I think becomes more and more relevant and absolutely critical. So I'm going to end with that, I guess. So I think I probably won't get my time.